The MarTech landscape is flat for the first time in 15 years. AI is everywhere and integrated nowhere. And the most important problem in the stack right now doesn't even have a name yet. I named my company Monarch for a reason. And for me, it's interesting that the end of Scott Brinker's State of Martech Report ended with context is the monarch. I don't think that's a coincidence. And by the end of the episode, I don't think you will either. But first and foremost, welcome to the Making Sense of Martech podcast, where we interview leaders and put them in the hot seat. I'm Jacqueline Friedman. Today we have a special two-part episode. And if you're wondering why it took two parts, stay tuned. My guest today is Scott Brinker, the godfather of Martech. And he's been mapping this industry longer than most of us have been in it. And a little bit about him first. Scott has been analyzing marketing technology and its impact on organizations for more than 17 years as the editor of the Chief Martech blog, co-producer of the Martech Map, and co-author of the State of Martech Report. He previously served as VP of Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot. Welcome, Scott. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Jacqueline, thank you so much for having me, and very kind intro.
Wow, it's deserved. I'm excited to dive in. But first up, a couple of rapid fire questions just to kind of get you ready and loosened up. What was your first MarTech tool?
WordPress.
Ooh. You know what?
Not my first love, but my first MarTech tool.
Understood. What is one MarTech tool or feature you think is totally overrated, and why is everyone still buying it?
I don't know that I have one that I think is overrated any more so than too often in MarTech or in marketing, we look to the tool to provide the magic. And there's just not a lot of examples of the tools actually being magic. The tools that are overrated tend to be the tools that you chose the tool more than the actual marketing.
Yes, I call that SOS, shiny object syndrome, and the marketing department overall.
You do SOS, you end up SOL. Yeah, it's...
You know what? There you go. Exactly. Okay, what is one word you would use to describe MarTech in 2026, right?
Chaotic.
Ooh, good thing I'm chaotic neutral. Let's go. What's a prediction from a previous State of Martech report that you got definitively wrong?
So we generally avoid trying to make predictions because if the one thing I've learned year over year working on this is, I don't know, but I would be honest, there were a number of years I didn't go out on the limb. I was like, surely this is peak MarTech. I mean, come on. And it said 5,000 tools. You're like, there's just no way it's going to ever get larger than that.
It's not going to get better than this.
No, I mean, come on. It's 10,000. You're like, okay, now it's just silly, but it's not going to go more than that. So yeah, if I had made those predictions, I would have totally gotten them wrong.
Okay. So underestimation. That's the only thing. That's not too bad. Now the real question, did you use anything AI to build this year's landscape?
All right, so there's the research on the MarTech companies themselves. And so Franz has a team. He's actually built a whole little engine that does the first round of evaluating the websites and attempting a first pass categorization. We still verify every single one by a human, but using some custom AI tools to be able to sort of help augment that process has been very valuable. And then, well, I don't use AI for writing in the sense of, oh, here, write me a blog post and publish it.
Write my full 150-page report.
I have a philosophical objection to that. It's more of just I'm one of those crazy people who I actually love to write, so I like to do it on my own. So I generally wouldn't even touch AI. I will confess, this time around, I'm working on the MarTech State of Martech Report. I found a way of working with AI that was very helpful where I would come up with, I would do my writing, but then I'd throw it to the AI to be okay, you're a, CMO, what doesn't make sense here? Or, you're a MarTech skeptic, what's going to be your objections to that? And
okay, so you use it as a thought part, mainly.
Exactly. And it was actually, again, most of the time it would say whatever it'd say. I'd be like, that's fine,
Agreed.
There were definitely times I was like, oh, that's actually a very interesting angle that I hadn't thought about. And so, yeah, definitely, I'd say it's become a thought partner in how I evaluate and critique these things.
Amazing. Okay. Speaking of Franz Riemersma, who also co-authors this with you every single year, who is the contrarian in your relationship? And where did you two actually disagree for 2026?
I think we actually switch hats on that. I
Okay,
mean, this is
that's a
one of
healthy
the,
relationship.
just the wonderful thing about being able to collaborate with someone who, is, I mean, clearly like just, an incredibly well-respected leader in this field, on his own. And he brings a certain viewpoint to the world that's just different than mine. And so we constantly talk about it as the Venn diagram. And,
That's
there'll be
awesome.
things where the Venn diagram overlaps beautifully and like, you're okay, great, we're good on that. But there are plenty of times where it's like, oh no, maybe I say something and Swan's like, I'm not so sure I buy into that. Or he'll say something, I'm like, oh, I'm a little suspicious of that. I'm trying to think if I can give you a concrete example, because we do it so much. Like it's just a fluid part of the process. And it's a great way to almost like the AI thought partner thing. It's just like, you don't want to get, what's the phrase, high on your own supply. You really want that
You want someone to pressure
critical
test.
eye.
Yeah,
Exactly.
agreed. All right, speaking of diagrams, not a Venn diagram this time, but the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Useful tool or expensive theater?
Less relevant in today's world. I think there was an era where it actually was a pretty helpful tool for, I would say that the way the tech industry was structured is it was actually a decent way looking at that and doing that evaluation. I think in a world where, I mean, just picking MarTech, you got 15,000 solutions out there and the categories are constantly blurring and changing and things are evolving at such a crazy rate. And there's just so much specific dependencies that vary from one company to another as to what's going to be right for them. I think it's just really hard to like say, okay, and we'll just have this 2x2, and we'll have 10 things
Yep.
in a 2x2, and that will just magically give you the answer. I don't think the tech industry looks like that anymore.
Yeah, it's almost as if that magic lost all of its spark.
Touche.
All right. So you end this report saying content was king, and now context is the monarch. And because my company is called Monarch, I take it very personally in the best possible way. But I'll also say it wasn't entirely an accident as to why I named my company that. And so before we get into that context, I want to know where to start. And that's at the very beginning of the chrysalis. Most of us in the MarTech space are still in that soup, and we want to know where we're supposed to be going, how long we're supposed to stay here. And so you describe AI everywhere, integrated nowhere as a necessary state and not a failure state at the moment. Marketing ops practitioners keep holding the stack together with duct tape. What is it actually costing them? And are we automating the burnout or are we solving it?
Wow, so many great questions in there. So when we started the report and we're kind of, we knew very early on that, hey, listen, we're in a crazy period of transformation, frankly, unlike anything any of us have ever experienced. And so we knew that really was the overarching theme when we were like, searching around to find the metaphor for that. And it's an absolute cliche to be like, oh, well, like the butterfly comes from the caterpillar, but it actually, as we thought about, we're like, as cliche as that is, actually, that probably is a really accurate metaphor for what's happening because of that middle stage of the chrysalis, which, by the way, I've been mispronouncing for like the past 2 months and calling it the chrysalis. And I
That sounds
finally come to
fancy.
the
I like
conclusion
it.
that yes, it is the chrysalis. So, yeah, set the record straight on that. That middle stage where, yeah, the caterpillar is dissolving, the butterfly isn't quite formed. It is messy. And if you were just cut it open in those early stages, you would have no hint that there was actually going to be this like beautiful butterfly coming out on the other end. And,
Right.
I mean, that does feel like it's a very apt metaphor for where we're at. And actually, I think the message we were trying to communicate is, I think we're kind of all in that state. And like, each of us individually probably feels this enormous stress and pressure of like, hey, my world just seems really messy. Boy, I must be behind. I must be the slow kid in the class here, that I'm just not, where I need to be. Cause, every now and again you read all these things on LinkedIn of people who are like, yeah, I run 5,000 agents and they generate
Oh,
$5 million a day for me. And you're like, oh yeah, no, I'm not doing that.
yeah, I feel like we're in that messy middle stage, and it's not just for AI, it's for MarTech, it's for all of us, and as you say it so succinctly, it's hard to keep up
Yeah,
every day.
and so let's just give ourselves permission, that this is the actual state, we're all in. So we're gonna continue to transform and metamorphs, but it's not gonna happen overnight. I suspect we're further behind than we are ahead, in that we've got further to go than we've already covered.
Definitely agree. Your report describes marketing ops shifting from system administrator to context engineer. That's a fundamentally different job. What is happening to the people in that messy middle who can't make the leap?
I think for the most part, this is actually, then let's be honest, most people in marketing ops didn't really aspire to be system administrators. They didn't really aspire to be like, oh, yeah, you marketer, you're going to come up with all the great ideas and then you just want me to like, punch the keys to like, make that reality. I mean, they were happy to do it because again, they knew
Right.
how to do it. It is an essential part, but the aspirations were always like, like how do we really transform how marketing works and how it operates and like bring up that skill set to a higher level, the value that the delivering to the company to a higher level. And so in many ways, I think like this is an incredible moment for the marketing ops profession to clearly now have the opportunity. Now, does this require new skills? Yes. But I think these skills are actually within reach for everyone who's able to, basically allocate time and willpower to it. I mean, one of the great things about these AI tools is, and it's a little bit like self-referential to these, but one of the best ways to learn these things is to actually ask the AI, like, all right, teach me here,
Yeah.
walk me through, workshop me through this, help me work on examples, help me learn, test me, quiz me. And yet here we've got it. And so like we just take that for granted. So I don't know. I think like this is the opportunity. Marketing ops is going to be the foundation upon which all these things that we want to do that are so miraculous and wonderful and exciting and creative with AI marketing, they have to be on a solid foundation that marketing ops is the ideal team to be able to deliver.
Yes. One of my favorite CMOs, when I ask her what are her like guiding principles, and she goes, community and marketing ops. Without those two, you don't have a business.
I love it.
And I totally agree. All right. So we've been talking about the human side of things. Now I want to look at the market side because the headline number this year is one that no one saw coming. Landscape is effectively flat for the first time in 15 years, less than a 0.1% growth after a decade of explosive expansion. You call 2026 the pause, not the peak. Maybe it's because you've learned not to predict things, but I want to push back on that. Have we entered our own trough of disillusionment, or what would make you wrong here? And it would actually be fewer in the future.
Let me confess one of the things I've struggled with over the year of that MarTech landscape, and that is where to draw the boundary. I mean, it's easy to say like, okay, Adobe and Salesforce and HubSpot and all these, clearly they qualify and they can be on there, but as you start to go down to that long tail of smaller and smaller companies that are doing more niche products or startup products, where do you draw the line and say like, no, that's just too small and too niche. It doesn't actually qualify. And we've tried to make that call using a variety of, heuristics. But for instance, one of the things we chose not to do was if you were just a plugin to WordPress, we're not going to include it. Not because actually, I mean, you might be legitimately like you might be a really great, MarTech tool, but it's like there are what was something like 59,000 WordPress plugins alone. So if we were going to like just pull that in and say like, oh, well, those all qualify, as a kind of MarTech app you could plug in, and then it would be even more silly than it already is. So my point in leading up to that is I think we're on the precipice of an absolute explosion of the number of pieces of software and apps and agents that are just because, I mean, the barriers have been dropping and dropping and dropping. But now with AI, I mean, just the ability to create incredible things. So the question becomes like, okay, well, how much of that is going to qualify as, commercially valuable? How
Yes,
would we
that's where
regulate
my
all that?
cynicism comes into
Mhm.
play.
Totally.
If
But
I have a feeling we're entering into a contraction phase will eventually lead
Expansion.
so my answer to the question would be, I think it's going to be a bifurcation. This is my best guess, but it is only just a guess. I think we are seeing this split between core infrastructure capabilities in the MarTech stack and then a whole menagerie of amazing things that, are going to be built on top of that. The infrastructure, I do think, is going to lead towards consolidation. It's actually one of the reasons why I think a lot of the incumbents who are already very strongly established, I think SaaS apocalypse be damned. I think actually a lot of them have a very good opportunity to bridge into this transition of the next era. And the two examples that come to mind most immediately is just a few weeks ago when Salesforce announced their, Salesforce headless. Like that is sort of an embrace of saying like, yep, we have a different role for, our software than the UI. And then I saw a few days ago, HubSpot announced like, okay, yep, we're going to make everything available programmatically. You can do it all through APIs. There are others like that too, but I think that those are two great representatives of saying like, okay, we've entered the phase where the major MarTech platforms are really infrastructure. And I'm assuming we will probably want to continue to track those as a market, and there'll be interesting new categories around that. I think for the explosion of other stuff that happens on the other side, I don't know that it's actually going to be possible to track it in any meaningful way. Certainly not on a logo by logo basis.
Fair.
As a research scientist, I am intrigued about mechanisms to try and quantify the scale of that universe. But yeah, there's no way it's going to fit on a slide.
Yep, it doesn't fit on a slide at the moment, even though
Yeah,
we
you could
try.
argue it doesn't fit on a slide now. It's fitting on a slide like 10 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah, I strongly believe it will become an ecosystem play, similar to how the app exchange or how you previously mentioned WordPress with all the different like non-widgets. I think almost everything is going to become, whether it's via MCP or through some other means that we just don't know.
All right. I was able to connect with you through like the butterfly metaphor. The moment you say the word ecosystem, that's my happy place. So
Yeah.
I actually agree with you that yes, it is an ecosystem world.
Without a doubt.
Brought to you by our sponsors. If there's one theme that's followed me at every stop in my MarTech career, it's trying to get good data into the hands of marketers. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about our sponsor, HighTouch, the leading composable CDP and AI decisioning platform. Companies like Domino's, Chime, Aritzia, and PetSmart trust HighTouch to power their data. And here's the kicker. 90% of customers have a real use case live in production within their first week. That means you can implement a world-class CDP in months rather than the usual years-long headache. That's why top brands choose HighTouch to personalize every customer interaction at scale. See what HighTouch can do for you at hightouch.com/MSOM. And now back to the hot seat.
Content marketing. That led all of the subcategories of net production removal.
Yeah. Did they get an award for that?
Yeah.
Trophy.
And it's a little sad, but it makes sense. And you identified 3 different causes. So foundation models are commoditizing to the core feature. Incumbents have moved quickly, and product market fit has been just completely elusive to so many. But isn't that just what happens to every first wave of mover and shakers, and what makes the second wave maybe more durable?
Yeah, I mean, and again, even though there was 100 some odd companies that got removed from the content marketing category, there was still another 100 or so that got added. There's still new companies that are coming in, that have an idea, have an innovation, a way they're going to do it. So, while the net was certainly a compression, it is in no means a static category. In fact, that's arguably one of the overarching themes of that whole landscape is while there's a lot of churn going, like while the numbers stayed flat, the actual churn happening within these categories of some going away and new ones coming in. It's frothy, I think would be the word. Let me push back on the question. I'm not sure. We have come from a world where the value of software, to the degree to which we said like, oh, this is a great software application, has been its durability, because frankly, it took so much to build software. The expectations became, oh, software is a business model. You build it once, you then like make infinite copies and, buy a yacht somewhere in the South Pacific.
Hopefully one
That
day.
world is, I won't say it's completely going away. There will still be software technologies, that might fit that model. But for the vast majority, it's going to be, no, actually, there's this amazing piece of software that shows up and it does what it does incredibly well and people love it. And then time goes by and something else comes along, and that sort of fluidity of software. I don't know. Let me give this as a analogy. At the various points in times when I'd produce that MarTech landscape, one of the pushbacks I get is like, how can marketers be expected to choose among like 15,000 different options? And I'm like, well, they do a perfectly good job choosing between 400 and 50,000. And you're like, what? What do you mean? I'm like, there are approximately 450,000 agencies of one kind or another throughout this world. Marketers haven't exactly been setting their hair on fire about that. It's just the nature of that space is you're like, oh yeah, there's infinite choice, but we'll have our way. We sort of satisfy, who we're going to work with. And I kind of wonder if a lot of software is essentially going to go in that direction. There's essentially going to be infinite number of ways you can build software or have someone build it for you or, buy this sort of thing. But we're not going to treat it like this durable asset, the way we had for years. And also means as a software creator, just like, you can have a creative agency that does amazing work and they do this and they win all these awards and, their clients are incredibly successful. And then 2 years later, they're no longer the hot agency and people moved on and they did something else. And like, that's just how that flow has been. It kind of feels like the software world might look a lot like that.
Very likely. Okay, so I keep running into something in practice. The landscape is moving faster than any evaluation cycle can keep up. Gartner, Forrester.
I do feel for them. It's really hard to do that. Yeah.
I would, but I don't. Oops. So as an example, Sora went from world-changing to shuttered in 6 months. Instant checkout went from existential threat to being sidelined in the same window. A practitioner is supposed to make real decisions and stack decisions when the ground won't stop moving underneath them.
By the way, just as an aside, this is why I will not throw stones at Gartner and Forrester, because those two specific things of like, hey, instant checkout and Sora were things in my report back in December of like, hey, look at these things that seem to be changing the world. And then like 3 months later, you're like, yeah, no, just kidding.
They're worth highlighting of what it could do. So
but I think the point is like, yeah, it is this chrysalis stage. The soup can take any crazy shape that is hard.
It can be cold soup or hot soup. Do you want gazpacho or what?
Touche.
How are folks supposed to actually make real decisions when things keep changing every month or week or year?
Okay, so a couple thoughts on that. First of all, do not start with the technology. And we tried to drive that home in this most recent report too. Marketing always needs to start with the customer, the business, the value proposition. Franz in particular has done a really a lot of work around like how to help people think about this through a value engineering lens. It is so easy to get distracted with the tech, particularly at this moment in time. If you don't maintain strategic clarity about, okay, who are your best customers? What are they really getting from us? What do they want? How much money do we make working with those customers? These are the things that drive marketing and drive the business. And then the technology is much, much lower down, the ladder of things that we might implement to be able to execute and fulfill on that. So that's one. The second thing is, I look at technology as often in this set of layers. In fact, I've started using these pace layering diagrams more and more frequently. There's one in the State of Martech Report, just because, the different components of your tech stack are not equal. They're not changing at the same levels. There is, particularly as we see this shift towards infrastructure, things like, okay, I'm going to have a cloud data warehouse or lakehouse or something like that. That is a decision you will probably want to be very thoughtful in evaluating, your choices. But then once you get that in place, you probably not going to be swapping that out every 6 months. And it just doesn't make sense to do that, and then there's like layers above that. I mean, systems like Salesforce and HubSpot, people do change those, but they don't change them incredibly frequently because, again, like once you've made your evaluation, you put something in place, and then, and the whole stack kind of has these different layers. And at the very top, there's a bunch of things that we're always experimenting with now, things that we're vibe coding ourselves and whatnot. It might change very, very frequently, but then to me, when you look at those pace layerings, the number one evaluation criteria I bring to it is how well does it set you up to support change? Because I think that is the overarching meta game here is we don't know what the future is going to look like, but we can be pretty certain it's going to be different than what we've got today. There's going to be other things we're going to want to do, new apps, new capabilities. And so to the degree that we are strategically evolving our tech stack in a way that maximizes our optionality for the future, then that also makes it a little bit easier when you start evaluating some of those, products or capabilities on the frontier, because it's a little bit easier to say like, okay, well, we can bring this in, we can trial this, we can proof of concept this. If it's working for us, great. If not, we'll move it on. And the way we've designed our stack architecture makes it feasible for us to do that without requiring an act of Congress, which here in the US, we can apparently no longer get any acts of Congress. So like, which, you appreciate anything you're going to do to avoid the acts of Congress.
Yeah, I think to your point, this is where I'm particularly bullish on modularity and composability is you have that flexibility. And that's, in my eyes, one of the downsides of some of the legacy players where that stickiness is their business function and model, as opposed to actually do what they need to do.
That's actually why I was so impressed with both Salesforce and HubSpot on their commitments on the headless side, because I have to imagine had they had their druthers, they wouldn't have done those things, right? Because again,
sure.
It's like,
They like their
use,
moats.
use our UI, use our agents, use our thing. This
Exactly.
mode of having to essentially surrender to the market and say like, all right, listen, we get it. You're just going to want to do your own things on top of this. And if we still want to be at the center of the stack, and they all want to be at the center of the stack, they just have to become fully open. But that was not a strategic. I don't know for a fact, but my guess would be that was not their strategic preference. It was the strategic reality that they adapted to. And I give them credit that they're like, okay, let's not be delusional about this. Let's give the market what it wants.
Agreed. I don't think they want to do it at all, but here we are. But it's going to be interesting, particularly on the Salesforce side. Like, if Data Cloud is still required to be the engine of so many things, is that actually antithetical to what they're claiming they're going to do? So it's going to be an interesting situation. And so while we've been talking about how kind of the ground underneath all of us is moving, but also kind of in a specific direction, it brings me to your primary thesis, which I think is your sharpest. So the stack is stratifying. You say AI native wins the creation layer, while incumbent SaaS holds the orchestration layer due to data gravity. But that means operators are now governing a stack with competitive physics every layer. We've kind of talked about this a little bit, but have we solved fragmentation by creating a coherence problem that's actually worse?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to get a little bit ugly, is my honest assessment, because there is a prize at the center of the stack, at least hypothetically, that, hey, if I'm going to have all this stuff moving around at the speed of light, I need some sort of system that provides the center of gravity to be able to orchestrate this, coordinate this, govern this. In MarTech, the major existing platforms, like Salesforce, like HubSpot, they absolutely see that as like, yep, we are, this is kind of what they've been doing, but, at a layer that was mostly around coordinating humans. It's a bigger challenge here now, just the scale and speed of all things agentic. But they have a very legitimate claim of like, okay, yes, we should be the ones doing that. You've got the data layer companies, like Snowflake and Databricks and folks that are very clearly moving up the stack. They're like, well, listen, we've got the data, we got the compute, we're running the AI, we've got the semantic layer, we've, got the gateway to govern the agents. We should be the ones coordinating that. You've got the frontier labs, being like, hey, well, we're the ones actually, we we're the creators of, all this AI magic. And so we've really got the best ideas of how we think these things should be orchestrated. And we can do that. You've got a whole bunch of startups on their own. They're like, okay, this is a new generation. It's a new opportunity. We've got the idea of how to come in as an independent and be able to orchestrate across all those. All of these folks are like moving towards the same prize at the center. And unlike the previous generation of MarTech, where you always had a lot of competition, but the competitors in many ways were very apples to apples. You've now got a case where it's like the apples, the bananas, the mangoes, the oranges, they're all coming towards the same conclusion. And it is, in my opinion, not at all clear who's going to win. In fact, there's almost a game theoretic analysis that would suggest none of them can ultimately end up because they're just so each one is so strong that it'll be at least a decade or more, before that shifts out. And the downside of that is I think it puts a lot of pressure on the marketers, the brands, the IT teams on this, because I don't think the answer is going to be clear. At the end of the day, you go back to value engineering and like, listen, really all that matters is, am I able to deliver the capabilities that serve my customer well? And maybe any one of those options can work. I pick one that works for me, and it doesn't really matter to me that there were other alternatives that could have also worked. All that matters is like, am I delivering the right value to my business, to my customers? There's also, the likelihood that, again, you get these major forces colliding. It's always interesting to see how the market might invent a solution. And just as one hint in this direction I think the MCP protocol, but I think even the MCP protocol is a little bit of a miracle that that's gotten established as a standard, because this is it was what we were talking about earlier, kind of the incentives for strategic lock-in on this. Like, Anthropic comes up with MCP at the time, like, Google was like, well, maybe we'll support that. Microsoft was, well, maybe we'll support that, and just because of the specific timing and the circumstances and the market pull, it just happened that standard sort of came through, got adoption, and now like you can't shut it down. Like, okay, yep, MCP, it's the standard. Everyone needs to do that. Everyone is going towards that. And so that in a very real way changed the strategic dynamic of how these things can work together. My glass half full perspective would be like, as we have this collision of these very different kinds of platforms all vying for, the center of gravity, it very well may be that collision structure is enough force to create some new kind of market standard. Maybe there will be a standard that will emerge out of the open source world.
One can dream. It sounds nice.
All this is super hypothetical, but yeah. Short answer is, I think it's going to be a really messy a few years ahead.
Agreed. And perfect tie-in to the next question here is kind of double clicking. So the middle decisioning layer between data and activation, as you call it, is invested in the new battleground. And most major vendors weren't founded on it. So who is actually going to win this, and how long do you think it'll take? So for example, there are now almost 30,000 MCP servers in 18 months. Versus it took 15 years to get 15,000 MarTech tools. What does that tell us about where the gravity is actually headed? Now you're going to start tracking it? What, you don't want 30,000 more things?
You told me at the beginning of that MarTech landscape thing of like, yes, God, you want to track 15,000 things? I'd be like, no, not really. I could have been a contender. What's interesting about MCP as a protocol is in many ways it's not very opinionated about the architectures you build around it. In fact, I think that's actually why it's caught on so much. And so it's strength. So like, hey, listen, I can, have like a product like HubSpot, that has its own agentic workflows capabilities. It's very easy for them to say like, oh yeah, well, plug in anything that you have an MCP server to, we can act as a client too and pull stuff from. We can also expose, what we do as an MCP server. So if you have your own client, if you want to do this in Claude, or it's something you've built yourself, or maybe if Salesforce wants to be able, you got this mechanism that simply allows all these different tech services and data sources and whatnot to be able to connect and talk to each other without having to agreed upon what is the higher level architecture and how they're related to each other. And so I don't know that there is one company that wins as a result of MCP.
It's maybe more distributed.
Yeah. All right. There is another dimension to this, by the way, because this comes up not just with MCP, but also, with skills and all these other things, is the governance and security component to this. The fact that these are very open ecosystems and anyone can throw this stuff up on GitHub, it's a real risk because there are bad actors out there. There's just incompetent actors, and so
I think that's usually the case.
Yeah,
more than
incompetence can do just as much damage, as someone
Exactly.
intentionally seeking to cause trouble. And since you had said the magic word ecosystem earlier, I come back to this, like having this incredibly open environment technically is a wonderful thing. But to make it actually reliable, operational, actionable, in a way that enterprises can rely on.
Attention.
I actually think it has to be an ecosystem dynamic of like, okay, we're going to need government ecosystems that actually vet these things and monitor them and manage them. And one of the reasons you would pay a platform that has an ecosystem is because you are paying them to be doing that work and making sure that they're curating a set of things that's reliable from that wild, woolly world out there.
Now I've got a hot take for you that I want your opinion on.
Is HubSpot a chrysalis company or a butterfly company at the moment?
Oh, I think they're all chrysalis companies.
Even the older players, yes, they might be like, all right, let's Benjamin Button a little bit, but...
No, I mean, again, like just taking Salesforce and HubSpot, just because I paid attention to their 2 announcements, that's not to exclude other companies. It's finite hours in the day. So, others might be doing this too. But if you take these two, to basically make the commitment that they're opening up all of their platforms to be fully accessible programmatically, so agents or frankly anything else can do that, that's a huge leap. The reality is there isn't actually enough materialized demand for that yet. A lot of this is like, there aren't a lot of people like, oh yeah, no, we're just running all this stuff through agents and like we never log into Salesforce or HubSpot anymore. No, actually the vast majority are still using these products the way they were using it last week, the way they were using it last year. So it is very much a leap of faith on those companies that like, we believe this future is going to look very different than the past. This could have pros for us. It could have cons. We've got hypotheses about how it will change monetization, how it's going to change competitive things. But we believe we don't have any choice. We believe that, listen, there's the past and there's the future, and we're just going to lean into it. And that's, again, why I applaud them. I think they could have taken a much more resistance-oriented stand to it. As a result, though, I kind of feel like they're in the chrysalis stage. They like, yeah, this is our market, our customers, how they use us, what they do. It's dissolving this one way, assembling this other, but it is by no means transformed into the next generation. And I don't know if you're asking, will some of them never escape the chrysalis phase? Probably. It's welcome to capitalism.
Late stage in particular.
Boy, we could take a whole different angle. But that'd be completely over my skis. I know Martech and almost nothing outside of Martech.
Hey.
So.
Okay. Well, all of our conversations so far, we've been talking about the landscape from an analyst point of view. I spend a lot of my days inside of organizations using the actual tech stack. Mm-hmm. And what I keep running into something, I've started just using the term like synthetic certainty. It's AI outputs that feel authoritative, that look like the right answer, but actually can't be validated. So I want to spend the next part of our conversation, part 2, pressure testing, where that shows up and what I think is the most important problem in MarTech right now, and nobody is naming it. Do you even know what I'm talking about before we dive in?
I guess I will find out.
My biggest takeaways from this part 1 conversation with Scott includes our industry is in a necessary chrysalis stage. AI everywhere, integrated absolutely nowhere, which means you're not behind. You're exactly where everyone else is. And accepting the mess is the first strategic move. The marketing ops is evolving from system administrator to context engineer, which means the practitioners who invest in learning how to orchestrate AI are now building the most defensible skill set in the entire stack. Full vendor consolidation sounds efficient, creates a dangerous lock at renewal, which means strategic optionality isn't a sign of indecision. It is the leverage you need to protect very deliberately. Thanks for tuning in to the Making Sense of Martech pod. See you next time. Special thank you to Christine Murtaugh, who edited this episode. An extra special thank you to Jenna Carter for believing in this passion project meets business.